Welcome to another edition of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And today's guest is Chris Michael Harris. And Chris really brings a unique perspective to this podcast because he actually works with people who are thinking about being entrepreneurs. But what's fascinating is those principles that he speaks about, the things that we're going to dig into in our interview, are things that apply whether you're looking to transition from that job into owning your own business, or you've been owning and operating your business for the last 20 years. There's some pithy, practical, super strategic insights that we're going to get from Chris. So let's welcome him to the show right now. Welcome, Chris, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, Chris, so am I. I mean, you bring a slightly different focus than some of our other guests, which I think is incredibly useful to our listening audience because of that fact. So why don't you, just to give us some context, just tell us who you primarily serve and what do you do for them primarily, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so built my first company for my college apartment to $1.2 million in revenue, completely bootstrapped, and just kind of realized that people need help doing this. You don't learn this stuff in school. And I told myself, I'm going to start a school for entrepreneurs someday. So here's where we are now. I'm a business coach by trade, but I also have what we call StartupU, like Startup University, where we help entrepreneurs, people transition from job into business or take their business into being more profitable and bigger and so on and so forth.
Wow. So it's interesting. Let me take the first part of that. Somebody moving from job to entrepreneurship. So as a lifelong entrepreneur, I've had many friends who had nice corporate gigs and they were doing well. And they would tell me things like, well, I'm actually an entrepreneur at heart. And I'd say, well, really? Like, do you ever worry about your paycheck? Do you ever worry about making payroll or any of those other worries? And he answered, they meant they were just intrapreneurial. They were kind of creative folks. But you're talking about people that are actually ready to actually pull the ripcord and make that transition. So what do you see as the primary kind of motivator or mindset of somebody actually really ready to make that transition?
It's important to define that. I'm glad you bring that up because there are often times where people, they're not an entrepreneur, they're in a bad situation. Meaning they have a toxic environment, they have a boss they don't jive with, the culture doesn't fit who they are. So there's a lot of things that people will falsely assume they're entrepreneurial or want to have a business. And I'm not here to detract anybody or whatever. I'm just going to tell you what I'm seeing, right? But I see that too. But the big thing I think a lot of people will seek out is the freedom to do what they want to do. Maybe they've always kind of, thought outside the box. Another thing that I often see too is you see a lineage there. There's a pattern with these type people. I always say this, entrepreneurship is not a career, it's a lifestyle. So you probably have, and you've experienced this, you host a podcast yourself. You'll see people that even when they were 8, 9, 10 years old, they were doing something, right? Outside the 9 to 5 hour for pay model. Oftentimes you found they did DIY yard work, or they were detailing cars or doing things like that outside of the hour for pay model. And so usually what I found with those people is that they just haven't been able to fully pursue that just yet, but they've always kind of been that person. You know what I mean? So that's really what they're seeking, is the exploration of who they really are, not necessarily anything external other than just kind of alignment with who they are.
So somebody who is in a context that wants out doesn't mean the right step for them necessarily is wanting into starting a business or something. It may sound like the better answer.
And I've seen people do that, thinking that entrepreneurship or having their own business is the right move, and blow through their entire life savings and literally hate every aspect of running their own business and go back to a job. And now it feels like they're starting from scratch. You're never starting from scratch. That's a false narrative, but feel that way financially speaking. And it really just had to do with the fact that they weren't in the right job or working for the right person.
That's fascinating. So when somebody is in that right mindset, like you said, there's tells earlier in their life. They say, well, I've taken some risk. I did the paper route, or I did a hustle play while I was in college. I made PCs in my dorm room, like a Michael Dell or something like that.
Sure.
That person making that transition, is it enough to have zeal? We often think of entrepreneurs as zealous. Is the zeal enough, or do they need something else to be successful in that transition?
It doesn't hurt. It really helps a lot because, I always say this, the dream dies when the bank dries, right? And so you get to a point where you're going to find out, is this thing really enough to keep getting me up in the morning? right? And that's when you know, like, this is who I am, not this is what I do. And it's a totally different dynamic for me and for many entrepreneurs. And I experienced this, right? I talked about how I hit, 1.2 for my college apartment, but there was a starvation period there, as there is with most businesses. You will know quickly, right, if this is for you or if it's not for you. And you're going to have to put together some of those X's and O's and start really immersing yourself. I think the biggest thing, and you probably see this as well, people they try to take the skills and the knowledge and everything else they have from job. And I'm not saying that you should discredit all of it, but they try to just apply that and fit that into the box of entrepreneurship. And you have to really uh, buy into it and then adopt the skills that you need, adopt the mindset, probably more importantly, that you need to be successful as an entrepreneur, and then just be tenacious about it. Like I said, for me, going back to a job, no, that was not a possibility. It just wasn't a possibility. So I pushed through those hard times. But some people, they stay in that stage, that period too long, where they're kind of stuck between, this isn't working, oh my God, I made a mistake. They stay there too long, which is what I help people do, is kind of truncate that time frame. And that can sometimes lead them to start doubting their decisions. Financially, they might have a choice. They might have to go back to a job because they weren't able to get launched successfully off the ground and be monetizing, to where they don't have just don't have a choice.
Well, one thing that I had a mentor of mine help me with at a point in transitioning in my life. I had a similar situation. Something I had done did not succeed, and then I felt very, you feel kind of crestfallen. You're saying, boy, what am I going to do now? I really don't want to go back. I don't want to give up on my dreams. And this is a while back. But he said to me this. He said, Jose, sometimes you just need a get well job. Don't think you're giving up your dream. It's a get well job. It's
there you go.
You just got to replenish. You need some more ammo. You need to replenish. You have a set of skills, like Liam Neeson. You have a set of skills that can be used. So do that and just think of it as a get well job. And it actually turned out to not only be a get well job, it actually helped align the rest of my career as an entrepreneur, because I learned a lot in that job. It was a 2-year gig and it was great experience, but then I was ready to move on from there.
Right. And I'm glad you bring that up, because that's the two strategies that we've seen really work that people kind of botch. So usually for the older crowd, and I'll let you define, the listener, if you fall into that crowd or not, I won't tell you an age specifically, but just a season of life more so, where you want to keep, so I call them night and weekend warriors or side hustlers. You're probably going to go to one of those two avenues if you are looking to transition into a business. Let's address the first one, the night and the weekend warrior, which is kind of what you're talking about, the get well strategy, right? So let's assume you haven't done that yet, but you are transitioning into a business. Night and weekend warriors, what you're doing is you're carving out time before and after work and on the weekends to work on this business. Your business is your side project. Doesn't have to be a lot of time. In fact, my favorite business book of all time, The One Thing by Gary Keller, highly recommend. He talks about how you need 4 hours a day towards your one thing to get the windfall that you're seeking. So if you can really kind of narrow in on what you need to be focused on just to get to the next immediate milestone in this side project you're working on, it can be 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night. In fact, we actually have students that have done that, have actually turned a 7-figure, not a 6, a 7-figure business with a full-time job, just doing 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, and a little bit on the weekends. That's literally all that was required. If you have big responsibilities, mortgage, kids, things of that nature, probably the route you want to go. That's why I say it doesn't necessarily be age dependent, but more season dependent on where you are. Okay. The weekend, the side hustlers, that's what I was, right? So young, fresh out of school, don't have a lot of responsibilities, probably single. Those type folks, it's amazing to have those side hustles in place. And the good thing is there's never been more of those side hustles now, whether it's Uber, DoorDash, Airbnb. You can rent out a sofa in your house. I wish these things were available when I was doing what I was doing. You can get roommates. You can lower your cost of living. You can shop at Aldi. So these things that path allows you to focus on working on your business full time. And then you take a lunch break and go drive people for Uber, or you work, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. delivering food for people on DoorDash or whatever, an amalgamation of these various things. Those are the two paths we see work most successfully for people. But a lot of people don't really define what it looks like. They get to the point where on the brink of an existential crisis, right? I want this business so bad. I'm just going to, and they make that leap. They go to a Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within a seminar. And I love Tony. Tony's a digital mentor of mine, but they get all fired up and they just jump, and there's no real plan in place. Right. And those are the two routes we've seen. So I can get more nuance with that or not, but those define which one of those you fall into, I think is really, really important.
Well, I love the clarity of that, but there's something that's a theme in both those strategies. Is you're going to work. You're going to work
Oh,
hard.
you're going to work.
Right. So like,
Yeah.
and we all know, like the hardest working man in the speaking circuit is Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4 Hour Work Week, right? Yet
Yeah.
he's on tour constantly. He's a nice guy apparently, and whatever. And
Yeah.
and there's some brilliant things in that book.
Yeah.
But there are people caught up in looking for, I just want to work 4 hours a week and make millions. And I'm sure somebody somewhere has managed that, but that's a rare thing, and it doesn't seem like that's necessarily a primary strategy. I think there's still some benefit of like you just got to roll up your sleeves and get to work. If it's worth doing, it's worth working.
Hey, I've been paycheck independent, as I call it, meaning I haven't had a job uh, for over 10 years at this point. And I can tell you, if there was a way to hack it in 4 hours and make millions, I probably would have hopefully arrived at that place at some point in time. I think more like 40 hours is probably more realistic at best.
Wow. Well, so one of the things for that person who makes a transition. So now let's say they have an idea for, let's call it a real business, something that has some structure. They think is going to offer some value to a particular audience.
Right.
They're thinking through, this is what I'm passionate about, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I'm going to be an architect if they have that kind of education training, or I'm going to be a coach because I'm really good. People tell me I'm good at coaching, whatever that range of things is. Or I have an idea for an invention. I'm going to put it up on Kickstarter and I'm going to, start manufacturing.
Sure.
What are some of the things that you find as you coach people through that transition, which I believe for our listeners who may be in established businesses, this might be a little bit of a refresher for you.
Yeah.
Chris, what are some of the things that you think are things people just really have to like get right, like foundation stones of success?
This is an easy one because I see it every single day. And I myself go through this. Even as a more mature and established entrepreneur, this is still something that's valuable for me going back and reflecting upon. The biggest thing is a lot of people start a business, something that they think is cool. And I don't dislike that. I like the idea of finding and scratching your own itch, meaning find a problem in the world that you experience and then derive a solution from that. The example that I always give is somewhere in the world, there's a guy that I believe it's a guy that came up with an idea to put these little pieces of cardboard on as a coffee sleeve onto a cup of coffee so people's hands wouldn't get burned. A lot of people, they try to make the idea too cute, too clever sometimes, not necessarily an iteration of a problem that already exists that provides a more augmented solution to said problem, right? So what I see often is you might think it's cool, you might think it's amazing, but do other people share that sentiment? Do other people feel the same way about this potential solution that you're offering? Because a lot of people go through the whole fundraising route or they launch this whole thing and they pour their whole life savings into it. And it's really kind of a solution that it has some holes, right? And the best thing you can do, and I tell people to do this all the time, and this is with a new initiative, this is with a new business, it doesn't matter. Like if I'm launching a new program or a new division of a company, whatever, I do the exact same thing. So you want to find either current customers if you already have an established business or prospective customers. And I don't mean mom, dad, brother, cousin, and neighbor. I mean potential real customers in the world. And you want to have at least 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 deep dive, insightful conversations, starting with the most important question, which is when it comes to X, whatever your business entails, what is your single biggest challenge, right? So whatever problem you're trying to solve, when it comes to that problem, what is your single biggest challenge? When it comes to parenting, what is your single biggest problem or your single biggest challenge? When it comes to moving, my first business was a moving company. What is your single biggest challenge? And then the key is this: shut up and listen and let them talk. Because what we often do then is we try to guide that conversation
Right.
towards them arriving at our solution, or we just go into pitch mode. We're just telling them how great and wonderful this idea we have is versus seeing if they organically arrive at a solution that we have already come up with. Because here's the deal: you're never going to have a more unique opportunity in time. And I'm going to provide some context for this in a minute, but to really ask some fundamental questions, ask about previous experiences, ask about what they're willing to pay for these things. People love one thing and one thing only, primarily speaking. They love to talk about themselves. So ask them about their experiences. Ask them, don't say, I need you to take my quiz or I need this. Ask them for advice. Hey, I need your advice. When it comes to this, what's your single biggest challenge? Then you're going to go through some more iterative questions that follow up to what they say that single biggest challenge is. And what you're going to find is this: for one, it's going to help you clarify what it is you're trying to build or what it is you're trying to roll out. And I would say this applies to, okay, let's take an example. Had Blockbuster done this before Blockbuster, folded, they could have avoided a huge pitfall. It'd really be nice if I didn't have to go out. I love renting movies, but it's kind of a pain on Friday night when it's raining and we're winding down and we just want to turn something on. It sucks to have to get up, put clothes on, go to the car, buy something. It'd be cool if we use this new thing called the internet and just be able to do it right from home, right? But they got stuck in their hubris and didn't listen to the market and let that guide and dictate them. Now, here's the next part of that. So we're going to do those conversations. Kind of a part 1A to that is.
And can I just pause you one quick second there, Chris?
Yeah, please.
I really want to call out something that's very important to our listeners.
Please.
So if you're in a bigger company, you're an established company, you're not starting up, you still have to do the same exact kind of market research that I think Chris is alluding to here. And unless you're like a mega corporation, chances are you can't commission formal research. These 10 conversations can be done if you're a $10 million company. Just find people. And I love, Chris, what you said. I just wanted to highlight it because I think it's that important. Ask the questions with the intent to actually hear the answers, not to tee up that the moment they say something that sounds positive to you, what you happen to have, say, that's why we developed product X.
You go into infomercial mode. Yeah,
because people are polite. So they'll start, oh, okay, sure. And then you think that head nod means they're ready to buy.
That's correct.
Doesn't mean anything. They just meant that, okay, you don't want to know anymore. I'm not going to tell you anymore. So I just wanted to call that out because I think this is not just for the startup. This is for the established company that wants to revive revenue. This simple process you've just described, and you're not done describing it yet, is something that I think anyone listening to this podcast can apply and should apply for their market research.
I don't make any big decisions without doing this, period, because it's too speculative. I like making decisions on data. The best decisions are made in numbers. This is how you do it. The other part you can do, right? If you get to the point where you're a bigger boy in the world or bigger girl in the world, meaning your size of your company, you can send out surveys that kind of accomplish the same thing. Just know you're going to need a lot more. So the general rule is one conversation equals about 25 of those survey results, responses. So you need like 250 to get the same 10, basically. That's our general rule. So then here's what you're going to do. You're going to take that information, and not only are you going to be able to provide the clarity and maybe construct your offer in a way that is conducive to the feedback that you got. You're going to look for those common denominators. You're going to really take time to dissect and sit on that and let it marinate, not just say, well, one person said this and one person, and so I'm going to create 10 different products on these 10 different, no, that's not what you're going to do. You want to look for those common denominators. But the next thing here, this is where people get really disillusioned by this whole, I'm not a good salesperson, I'm not a good marketer. You don't have to be. All right. So take a deep breath. You don't have to be, because you're going to take this feedback that you get literally, and you're going to plug it into either your sales copy or your sales messaging. But here's the kicker: using the words that they use. So if somebody tells me, hey, I've heard I need to do Facebook marketing, right? I do a lot of online business stuff, Facebook marketing, but I'm really just overwhelmed by like all of the intricacies and all the things that go into doing Facebook marketing. Well, I'm not going to take that and say, I help you do online marketing. I'm going to say specifically Facebook marketing. And I'm going to really get into the granular aspects of what that person said about why Facebook advertising seems to be so overwhelming to them. Because then what happens is when you start focusing on, and this is why I said, make sure it's not mom, dad, brother, sister, and neighbor. It needs to be real potential customers. Because what we're going to do is we're going to develop an avatar around that person. We're going to develop marketing assets around that person, a marketing and sales message around that messaging. And then here's what happens. It doesn't feel like you're selling. They feel understood. Understanding leads to trust. Trust moves the needle forward to conversions. So a lot of people feel like, well, there's just so many opportunities. There's so many people out there selling in the market, this and this and this. The example I always give is Airbnb. Chip Conley, right-hand man to Brian Chesky, the co-founder at Airbnb, came on my show. And I talked to him. I said, Brian, I said, Chip, you were in the hotel business, went to Airbnb. Was there a similar type war that went on in the background, much like we saw with Uber and the taxi cab business? And he said, Chris, there wasn't at all. And he said, and honestly, the hotel chains were baffled how Airbnb had the valuation it did. At that point, it was $21 billion, billion, like B with a boy. And he said, the thing is that we discovered was we actually tapped into an underserved segment of the market, right? Where people only A, traveled and stayed with friends and family, or B, didn't travel at all. And those are the people that we serviced. So when people go into a market and they say it's saturated, there's too much noise, there's so many competitors, think about this. Airbnb erupted going against some of the titans of industry, the biggest names on the planet, brand names on the planet. But they had a simple understanding. They took the time. Brian actually did this. When people stayed at Airbnb, the first few hosts, He actually flew out and spent time with them to learn about not only the experience, but what they could be doing better. And you hear that across the board. Arthur Blank did the same thing at Home Depot. These people are taking the insights they get. They're not making it too complicated, and they're going and deriving a sales message, marketing message, but also their entire concept is based off the feedback that they receive and just providing what people are saying they want.
And what's fascinating about that, Chris, is the way you and I'm so glad you clarified it. It's not just the feedback, because you can interpret again, and I've been with marketing teams that will interpret the feedback in the way that's most favorable to the strategy they already want to implement.
Right.
So they already want to do something. They say, oh yeah, clearly this input validates it. But you said something that's subtle, and I don't want it to get lost as somebody's listening to this.
Yeah.
And it's this: use the same language, the same words, the same ideas that the customer, the prospect is telling you. Don't reinterpret that. Like that same example about Facebook says, oh, so we should say we do social media specialization.
Exactly.
That's not the words that were used.
That's not what they said.
Words, if the words were Facebook advertising or Facebook marketing, two different words, use the one that got used the most, because that's what resonates. That's what's on their heart and mind.
You should see, if you run online advertising, for Facebook ads, you should see people in the comments tag their friend and say, I told you Facebook's listening. We were just talking about this. And it has nothing, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm not here to say whatever Facebook's up to. It's not my place in the world. But what I am saying though, is that when you get to the point where you're that dialed in, you talk about cutting through the noise. When you're using the language that people use in your market, you're going to grab their attention and you're going to establish trust. It's just impossible not to.
Wow, that's a real great takeaway. And Chris, we're at the end of our time today. So thank you so much for sharing with our audience some incredibly pithy and useful insights for, I think, at any stage in their business life. If somebody listening to this says, wow, this Chris is really sharp and really tuned in on this, I'd like to know more about Chris and how to contact him, where should they go?
Yeah, so we did put together a resource that we include when we talk about kind of the transition. It is a very tough thing to do, and we do find that a lot of people don't do it successfully. I myself, again, really had to learn through a really tough situation transitioning from job into business. So we just put together a free resource that actually we're offering a free class as a follow-up to that resource as well. So you get 2 amazing freebies with that. So if you go to Ultimate Startup Checklist, USC download is what is the URL, USC download, like Ultimate Startup Checklist download.com, USCdownload.com. You'll get this 7-8 page PDF that gives you everything you should be doing to make that transition successfully. And then we have a class, how to get your first 100 customers in just 100 days without breaking the bank. You're going to be invited to that as soon as it's launched. Should be launched here in the next few days. So you don't have to do anything else. You'll get a notification about that as well. So a lot of awesome resources for people that are serious about pursuing entrepreneurship wrapped up in that. And then on social media, I'm at Hey CMH on all platforms. Hey, like hello. Hey CMH, like Chris Michael Harris on all platforms.
Fantastic. Well, we've just been with Chris Michael Harris learning entrepreneurial lessons. If you're in that transition in life, moving from maybe working for the man, wanting to be the man, so to speak, to make that transition. But even if you're already running a business and so on, the principles, Chris, just thank you so much again for sharing with our audience. We really appreciate it.
This is great, man. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.